Hello everyone and welcome back to the ClickerCast. When you're lost in the darkness, look for the light. You're joining myself, Chris, alongside my lovely, non-infected co-host, the man of many pixels, Mr. Richie. Welcome back.
You assume I'm not infected, but you don't know for certain.
I mean, that's on you. If you want to be like that, that's on you. That's on you. Welcome everyone, of course, to your weekly The Last of Us podcast, where we break down and round up everything from the HBO adaptation, The Last of Us, coming to you on HBO Max over in the States, Sky Atlantic, Now TV over here in the UK, and wherever you get your fix, whether that be legal or non-legal. You're joining us as we break down episode 2, Infected, runtime of 52 minutes, debuted, of course, this past Monday, over on your respective TV channels, written and adapted by Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin, and directed, his directorial TV debut of Neil Druckmann as well. Richie, before we get into the show, of course, welcome, boys and girls, clickers, infected, bloaters, all of you fine folks out there. Thank you for joining us. I can see a couple of you already stopped by in the chat. Thank you very much. We do appreciate you popping by. Don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe so you're kept in the loop with all of the great content we do here at Helix Plays Games, like our other PlayStation podcasts, Xbox podcasts, live streams, gameplays, and all of that other jazz. It helps you find more content that's specific to you. Richie, we're here to break down episode 2, and before we get into we had a great showing last week, so thank you to everyone who stopped by. You can get, I just want to make it clear, if you don't catch us on YouTube and you want to catch up later on, the audio version will also be up on podcast services, so if you do want to listen to it on your podcast preference of choice, after the fact, if you're driving to work, if you're a bit busy, if you like to go wireless, hands-free style, it will be up probably by midnight tonight on the day we go live with this one. It takes a while to get the file edited for audio and out to podcast services, but we intend to get it up as quick as possible, so thank you for checking it out over there. I think nearly 100 plus of you checked it out that way, so it's worthwhile doing.
And just search for ClickerCast on your podcast service of choice. You should find it. If you can't, search for CloudQuest.
Yes.
Because it's on the old CloudQuest feed.
It is. So if any of you look at it and think the cover art might be a bit old school, that's because it is. It takes a while to distribute and update.
Yeah.
But evening to everyone out there. Sedna, Jin, Don Grattan, thanks for stopping by, and all of you other clickers out there who clicked that link and joined us. Right, a few things before we get into the episode breakdown, Richie. I wanted to touch on, thought it was very specific and relevant to the show. This week it was reported that The Last of Us, the actual PlayStation 5 game, Part 1, and The Last of Us remasters have seen a massive spike since the game went live, which is no surprise. We kind of always anticipated this was going to happen. The Last of Us Part 1, the PS5 version, has seen a rise of 238% in physical sales over here in the UK. And the Last of Us Remaster, which is the PS4 version that came out in 2014, has seen a spike in 322%, which seems crazy. It still hasn't cracked the top 10.
Yeah. I think we need to point out, though, if the remaster especially, that seems insane. 322% of nothing is probably still nothing, because who's actually realistically buying the remastered version? If you don't own the game already, you've got two versions there. Part 1, the new version, or the old version. I think you're just going to buy the new version.
I mean, you'd imagine Part 1 was selling fairly okay. It only came out in September.
Yeah, but I'm saying Part 1 is probably actually sold more than Part 2, than the remastered
yeah,
version,
absolutely. Plus,
despite the numbers.
Yeah, plus the remastered version is readily available in the PS5 PlayStation Plus collection.
Yeah.
And as you said, it's an old game. A lot of people already probably had it. But it's impressive nonetheless, and long may it continue. Episode 2 then, overall, let's get your just first overall impressions, and then we'll get into our traditional breakdown. What were your thoughts?
Again, I really enjoyed it. I think this episode was a bit more action focused than the last time. I think that was actually probably a good thing. So it keeps changing the pacing a bit, where episode 1 was very setting the scene. It developed the lore a bit, but then focused a lot more on just 3 characters. Like, there's less people involved. There's less. It does feel a lot more isolated this episode in terms of, like, because they're not in the QZ. There's not so many people around. There's not a load of there's no real extras, to be honest.
Yeah.
In any scene, it's just Joel, Ellie, and Tess.
Yeah. When I was doing the cast breakdown, so on our doc that we use for this show, we've got the kind of actors and the characters that they play, so we don't make any mistakes. And yeah, trimming down last week's first episode to this was just like, it's just Joel, Ellie, and Tess. And then assorted clicker extras who do a great job, by the way, as we'll get into all that. But yeah, my first thoughts on the first episode, as you said, when it came to its end, it was kind of one of those moments where it's like, oh, it's over? It's over already? Like the Monday evening, whenever you guys watch it out there, it felt, compared to episode 1, which was, of course, 80-odd minutes nearly, much shorter episode. But like you said, it told a very distinct story. It got to the point, and it showed us a very different side of the world. We've seen the QZ zone. We've now moved out into the wild, and we wanted to see that kind of polarizing reality of safe behind a big concrete wall or out in the wild, because we heard from Ellie last episode that there's some shit going on out there.
Yeah, I mean, they used Ellie, I think, quite well in this episode for like giving the audience a bit of exposition. Because I think sometimes, again, we always have to remember that we've both played the games.
Yes.
We know what's going on. We know what the world's like out there. Average TV viewer who's never played the games, might not have even heard of the games, watching it, doesn't know. So using Ellie to kind of like, oh, Ellie's never been out of the QZ. Her asking questions, and then especially Tess answering in the way, basically it's like her preparing Ellie for what's out there kind of thing. I thought that was a really good way of like handling it's effectively an exposition dump, but felt very natural for how these characters will be interacting as well.
Yeah, any exposition told through the lens of a character is always a clever way of the writers getting their point across without directly addressing down the camera and going, guess what's happening? So I enjoyed that element too.
I think it was done quite well through Ellie's personality, her natural curiosity and like bit of silliness of what's going out there. She doesn't fully quite get the stakes yet, I don't think. Despite the fact that she has already been bitten. It's like she's only ever seen runners at this point, at the start of this episode. Yeah. So it was like she's heard rumors of other stuff, but she's kind of now like finding, oh, well, I'm out here. It's like, this is not what I expected. I thought it was going to be like swarms of them everywhere. That's because that's how you can imagine in the QZ. That's how it all gets overblown.
Yeah, everyone.
And then you got two experienced people kind of going, well, not quite like that. However, it can be a bit like that at times.
Yeah, everyone loves a campfire story. That's for certain, and that certainly obviously happens in the QZ zone with people going backwards and forwards. One of the things I was curious to get onto you before we get into the kind of breakdown of the episode. How has this been received out there in your wider world? So any of your colleagues talking about it? Any friends, family who are having an active conversation about a video game adaptation that's now on I guess, mainstream television?
I haven't really heard any of my family mention it. One or two of my colleagues, most of my colleagues have heard of it, but they haven't watched it. I think there's only one or two. I did like kind of bring up the topic myself. Has anyone, when people were just like in the break room talking about like TV shows, like, oh, has anyone watched The Last of Us? And I think there was only one or two people who had. Most people had heard of it but hadn't. Yeah. So I give it a push. But I think, to be honest, a limiting factor in this is the fact that it's on Now TV.
It's behind a subscription or specific.
It's behind a subscription that a lot of people don't have. And if you don't have a Skybox and you don't have Now TV, you're asking people to pay about £10 a month for one show. Yeah. And when they already have things like Netflix, they always have Disney Plus. So it's like, although I think the show's doing good numbers, if this was on a different service, it would be doing bigger numbers, I think. I think it would break through even more.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's limited to, like you said, that HBO Sky over here audience. However, the prestige of that kind of makes, again, the reason these shows are tentpole productions is to bring audiences in. Like, how many people signed up for HBO and Sky for Game of Thrones because it was billed as like the best television ever?
But more from season 2, though. Like, it was after like the season 1 kind of broke through and everyone was talking about it. That hype leading into season 2 is where Game of Thrones really properly exploded, I think. Yeah. Where Last of Us, well, we are episode 2. Yeah. So you might, I think I would strongly suspect if you looked at the numbers, like that Now TV, that HBO Max, that Sky Atlantic do over the course of the season, I imagine it'll go up every single episode.
Yeah, I mean, week on week, I think HBO confirmed yesterday or today that the second episode has seen a 22% increase of viewership week on week. And then the viewership of, I think, the previous episode had gone up astronomically as well. So,
because people were talking about it. So people went back, watched episode 1, then watched episode 2.
Naturally.
Like,
and there is that reality with the streaming services. You don't have to watch it day one because you've got the luxury of you can just click a link now and play it whenever. Like, that's the joys of not having to be beholden to regularly scheduled television. I can see a couple of people in the chat, Jin, just pointing out that, in the Netherlands, it's HBO over there as well. Relate to the party with a streaming offer. Same here in the UK. We don't have HBO over in the UK. We've got a variety of several streaming options, but Sky have the rights.
Now TV's been around for a long time in like the UK. But the problem I think it has is it has these tentpole shows, but not enough to keep people sustained. So we'll have 9 weeks of loads of people with Now TV memberships, then they'll probably cancel. Yeah.
I mean, remember, Now TV is just a supplement to the Sky cable TV service, which millions and millions have. So
even though I still don't understand why they have it.
But that's just us. Like, there's many, many generations older than us who just have the traditional TV boxes. And if they have Sky, they might be watching this and they might be drawn in. But aside from television regulations and rights alone, second episode, for me, spoke to my parents about it. My mother was shocked with Sarah last week because she knew the show had a little girl in it. She didn't think the little girl was Sarah. She thought I was talking about Ellie.
Switch.
Yeah, she thought Sarah was Ellie when I was talking about it. So when what happened to Sarah, my mum was just like, what the hell? I thought she was in it for the whole show. And it was like, wait.
I think we kind of called that last week on the ClickerCast, where like a lot of people who don't know Joel, don't know Ellie, see Sarah, and how much the first episode lingered on Sarah.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarge in the chat says as well, would you say you're enjoying it more because of the game, because you've played the games? So that's an interesting topic that we'll probably touch on a lot throughout the course of this series, is that I'm seeing kind of mixed reactions online for certain things. And I think there's a lot of people who need to grow up and realize it's not going to be a like-for-like, one-for-one adaptation. That is never going to happen.
If you want a one-for-one adaptation of The Last of Us, watch Chris's full playthrough.
Yeah, go do it. It's up on the channel now, all 18 hours of it or whatever it was. But I saw, like, again, just scrolling through social media, kind of keeping in the loop of all the news and such, and I've seen a couple of people specifically saying, like, they didn't like... Oh, it was something. I think one of the main ones was spores, which, again, you just need to let that go. You need to let that go. Yeah. One of them was like the way the clickers moved, or the museum was a different scene to when it was the hotel, and it was just like
you mean the order? Yeah, the order slightly.
It was like and they weren't. One of them was that Joel wasn't picking stuff up and crafting, and it was just like, it's not a video game. It's for television. It's not going to be just a camera behind Pedro Pascal as he walks through these sets made on a soundstage, doing the video game stuff. That's not how you tell stories in a different medium. And it's just kind of like, you need to grow up and understand that. But otherwise, you're never going to enjoy the show for what it's worth.
I can see a scene at some point in the next few episodes, like Joel and Ellie, like just camping out somewhere, and Joel's just there while they're having a conversation, just idly making like a shiv or something. And that's where you're going to get that nod to the game stuff.
Absolutely, there will be.
I think there was actually a bit of one in this episode, actually, when we get to the museum.
Yeah.
where I think Joel almost went into listen mode.
All right, crouch down with those knees. There will be a scene some point in the series where they do actually share a conversation by a campfire, because I've heard Neil Druckmann before talk about he wanted to get it in the game, but he could never find a moment of levity to include it. And if you actually go into the video game and the extras where they have the art gallery mode, there is an art gallery like diorama of Joel and Ellie sat behind a campfire that was pulled as assets from the game. So
that's the kind of scene where I can see him just like idly making a shiv or making a Molotov or something,
showing educating on how to make something using the scavenge.
But I think it's going to be a couple of episodes away from now, because where we are now in this episode, at the start of the episode, Joel wants basically nothing to do with Ellie. At the end of the episode, he basically wants nothing to do with Ellie, but feels an obligation to Tess.
That we don't know that, though. We don't know that yet necessarily. Like, he walks off camera. Like, we'll get to it, but like, he could just go a separate way. Like, there might be something at the start of next week. But back to Sarge's question around it. I think as someone who's completed the video game several times over, absolutely, it's one of my favorite franchises of all time. Going into this with an open mind, I'm absolutely loving the differences and the changes that they're making. And we will get into it with the breakdown, but the slight changes they're making, it's like reading your favorite story, but like the author's done like a pre-draft, and you get to see a different version of the same tale told by the same passionate people. And I think we said on last week,
the same people. That's what we have to remember. This episode was literally directed by the guy who made the bloody game.
Yeah. So if you're not happy with it, like if you're, they should have got someone better. There is no one better. The guy made the game. So if he's happy with it, you should be happy with it, because there's no one you can really go to. But again, we're approaching this with an open mind, Richie. That's the difference.
I haven't actually seen that much criticism, to be honest. No, I think you have to really realize that video games and TVs are different mediums. If this was a one-for-one adaptation of the game, it'd be crap, the TV. Because you'd have 5 minutes of Joel hiding behind a bookshelf, crafting shivs, watching the clicker's movements, waiting for the right moment to move, because he's trying to work out the pattern.
Yeah. I've seen some funny moments going around on social media saying this episode was nothing like the game. When I played the game, I got killed 7 times over. Joel hasn't died once. And it's like, that is fair. Like, I haven't seen Joel have his neck ripped out yet. And it's like, because it's not a game, it's a TV show. And if he dies, he's dead full stop, and the series cannot continue. So there are little changes that have to, of course, happen. But I think great.
I think all the changes that I've seen so far across the first 2 episodes, I think have been the right decision.
Absolutely. And of course, do let us know in the comments below as we go through if you have any questions for the breakdown, if you have any questions about the video games. These podcasts, we want to keep them. They naturally will be quite spoiler heavy if you haven't played the games. Again, I don't think watching the show and maybe hearing people talk about the differences detracts anything from the game, because the TV show is still going to follow most likely all the major beats. So playing the game again will just be like a different retelling, or vice versa. So just enjoy it for what it is. Again,
you've already mentioned it, but The Last of Us Remastered is on PlayStation Plus. So if you are a fan of the channel, get yourself PlayStation Plus. You can play through it.
Absolutely. Or my full playthroughs there of part 1 if you'd like a higher quality version of it, with running commentary by yours truly. Right, Richie. Let's move on to the main bulk of the show. Before we do get into the episode breakdown, of course, a big, massive shout out to all of our wonderful Helix heroes out there, the fantastic members of the channel who support the content that we do completely and help us improve and bring you better quality stuff. Of course, the ClickerCast wouldn't exist without the fantastic support that over 50 of you have given us over the last 3 years, as we've evolved from a Google Stadia channel and podcast to covering PlayStation, Xbox, and now television. RIP indeed, Google Stadia. It was taken down by the clicker that is Phil Harrison and Google Alphabet. But our Helix heroes, massive shout out to you. And if you can see people in the chat dropping some clicker emojis in there, or the Firefly logo, you can get access to those from as little as 99p plus early access to some of our other fantastic shows. So shout out to you, Helix heroes. Before we do get into it, quick question from Nick in the chat says, I'm hoping somehow that little side stories that all the notes tell you in the games really get into the show. She really enjoys those. So yes,
good point.
It is a good point. And I think we're going to see that played out. For example, spoilers ahead, I guess, for future episodes, but when we get to the Sam and Henry elements, I think we're going to see certain characters in and around that area of the United States.
Spoilers again for next week's episode. I think you might see some of them already adapted for episode 3.
Yes. Yeah, yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, we'll get into that as we look ahead to next week. But, Richie, let's break down the episode. So, starting with a cold open, Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin were saying on this week's The Last of Us official podcast, not quite as official of ours, of course, Richie, but I guess they've got Troy Baker, the director of the show.
The guys who made the TV show and the game as a podcast is less official than us.
You know what? I think we have a better name. I'm just going to say it. The Last of Us podcast, or the ClickerCast. You tell me which rolls off the tongue better. Either way, of course, we digress. They have infinitely more viewers than we do. Cold open, and he basically describes the director that the difference between a video game is that people can continue to play for as long as they want to. There is no end. The story continues as long as you can stay awake with a controller in your hand, or it runs out of battery if you're playing a DualSense. Am I right? You can just play for as long as you want to. Whereas with a television show, they have to end. It has to have an end point every single week and a start point to gauge interest, bring new people in. And in the podcast, Craig, the director of last week's episode, goes in depth about saying like it gave them a great opportunity to set the scene and bring people back into the story every single week. And what I loved with last week's scene from 1968 and this week's scene, which took place in Jakarta, Indonesia in 2003, again, it gives us a great insight into how the outbreak happened that we don't know about from the video games. It's
world building.
Absolutely.
This is the sort of stuff where you hear bits of it from like is done through the game, through environmental storytelling, where you see posters, flies, you pick up things on the ground that hints at how the world went from normal to what you see at the opening of the show. Like, but they're just doing it through a different way.
Yeah, and I think it's fantastic. So we open up in Jakarta, which, if we remember from episode 1, that was the radio broadcast saying that it was in Jakarta, and Tommy and Joel had a conversation about where it was, and Sarah corrected them because she knows her geography, smart girl. And this takes place 2 days before the breakout day we saw in Texas during episode 1. So they do tell you the dates at the beginning. So this takes place 2 days before it seemingly jumps continents over to the United States and to Texas, where Joel and Sarah and Tommy reside. And it starts by following a scientist of mycology, Dr. Ibu Ratna, as she's seemingly arrested by police officers while she's just out there having her lunch, Richie, and the officers show up and they escort her to the Ministry of Health of Indonesia. So very quickly we kind of set the tone with old ladies arrested and taken by... She's very sheepish about the whole thing, which, again, I don't know what the current state of Indonesia at that time in 2003.
I think there might have been not long before. I don't know. I'm not a historian of Indonesia, but from what I've heard, there was like some military sort of kind of stuff going on probably in her lifetime. So armed soldiers turning up at a diner in the middle of the day is like cause for, is this back to the bad times kind of situation?
I mean, if we're totally honest, if you and me was just sat having a Mackie D's in the middle of the day on our lunch break and some police officers or army military people rocked up and specifically took like a random lady who was just sat having a McChicken sandwich over in the corner away, we'd probably think, oh shit, something's going on here. So different worlds, no surprise.
I mean, yeah, who buys a McChicken sandwich?
And usually not as a standalone, as a meal, it's all right.
Deserves to be arrested for that.
I mean, that's your take. I quite like a McChicken sandwich. Let's not go down that rabbit hole. That could be a whole different thing. Shout out to Dre in the chat for stopping by as well. Yeah. But yes, they arrest her, and she is, again, they make a point of saying she's a doctor of mycology. And mycology is the branch of biology concerned with the study of fungi, including their genetic and biochemical properties, their use to humans, as well as their dangers, such as toxicity or infection, which... Because we know what happened in episode 1, we know why she's brought in as a specialist. Of course, she's took to the Ministry of Health. We kind of suspect what's going to happen here, but it's nice to see it kind of played out in a different part of the world. Because remember, in the video games, we don't see anything outside of the United States, ever. We don't hear any broadcasts. We don't hear any radio messages. All the notes we found around the world are just handwritten from local people.
Again, makes sense. Like, the world's went to shit. How the messages aren't going to get across. And again, the game, as we talked about last week, is very much in the, like, from the point of view of Joel.
Yeah, completely.
The TV show can expand on that.
Absolutely. So they escort the lovely lady into the research lab. We see her examine a petri dish, and I really liked how the military guy kind of prevented his little other scientist friend from basically influencing her decision. Like, she goes to explain something about what's in the petri dish really early on, and he kind of holds it back and says, no, let her make up her own assumptions.
Very good move, actually. As a scientist, I very much appreciated that. It's like, yeah, you don't want the colour. You bring in a second opinion, don't colour them. Let them see the data, let them make their own decisions, then debate.
Yeah, it was nice to see them get that a little bit. And again, it just adds to the tension of like, oh, she's only trying to be helpful, but it's like, no. This is serious. Like, let her make her decision. She, of course, examines it, and she immediately says, like, it's cordyceps, and it's not able to infect humans. And they basically kind of both reel back and go, it was a human sample, so shit. Okay, this is where we're going. Shout out to everyone dropping by in the chat as well. I can see loads of new names dropping by. I know you've all came over from Meg's fantastic stream of The Last of Us. She's just got Richie to the point of the end of this episode as well. So before we went live, Meg just witnessed the epic conclusion that was the end of this week's show, and I've seen loads of people out there playing through the game almost episodically, keeping up with the events in the show. Genius idea.
I'm doing the other way around. I'm watching the show and then catching back up with the game.
Yeah. So again,
that's what we'll be doing tomorrow.
Why not do it? It's amazing. Experience it in all its forms. Just like this fungus, of course, is experiencing new worlds as it's out there. She then gets moved on to examine the corpse, which she gets tucked into a room. We see a naked body spread out on a table. It's got a bite mark, and she basically ggets to examine it. She's in one of those big hazmat suits. I'm sure that's what you wear at work all the time, Richie, those big radioactive stay out of it suits.
No.
No. Just a smart as hell lab coat. She goes in. The body was bitten on the foot. She inspects it. She gets a scalpel, slices it open, and this is kind of like strike one for disgusting things you're going to see in this episode. Cuts into it, and there's just this horrible kind of like, it kind of looks like wet cotton wool, I guess, kind of tucked in there where the veins and the blood and stuff should be.
It's fungus.
It's mushroom.
It is literally the fungus.
Yeah, it reminds me of, when you're seeing kind of like spider nests, ant colonies, you get that kind of thick white webbing that sticks really compact. It was kind of reminded me of that. She then goes on to examine the rest of the body. She gets her little tongs out, and of course, first place you'd go straight down the throat. And what does she find, Richie?
There's a reason she goes for the throat.
Oh, is there? Oh, do tell.
Yeah, so the reason she goes for the throat is because she notices the wound on the leg is a bite mark, but looks like a human. So she asks the guy, is this a human? Was she bit by a human?
Yep.
The guy says yes, so she goes to the throat, because at this point, again, this is environmental storytelling.
Oh, bit of self.
She now assumes, she now is thinking, okay, if it's done passed by bite, let's check the throat. How is it doing it? Gets the tweezers, goes into the back of the throat, pulls out the fungus. The fungus moves towards her.
Yeah.
And that's when she panics and runs.
Yeah, she
so
kind of
there is a rationale. It's not just like, oh, this guy's got a bitten leg. Let's have a look down the throat. No, there's actually you can see the thought process.
Right. So she didn't just flip it over and go straight for the butthole. It was like there's logical thinking.
Yeah, there's a logic.
Lovely.
She's trying to figure out how it's spreading.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense as a scientist. That makes total sense. Of course, when she goes down with the tongs and she pulls it up and she just gets a big chunky slab of calamari, doesn't she? Coming straight out of that thing.
Yeah.
Tendrils, we've seen them in the last episode. These things are disgusting, and these are the things that are replacing the spores on the show. And so far, I'm loving it. They add such an element of horror rather than just like floaty spores. Ooh, in the air, keep your gas mask on. It's like, no, this thing is reaching out to get her, even through the suit. So the tendrils are sentient, that her face is there and it wants to get to her. She drops it. She panics. She of course tries to unplugs herself from her oxygen intake or whatever. Leaves the room alive and well. And the officer, then it cuts to kind of a new scene. The officer gives her a cup of tea and he explains basically the incident, which we presumed it's been going on for the last couple of weeks. That there's a flour and grain factory, which confirms, I don't know if you've seen it go around this past week, the bread theory, which was...
Yeah, I actually only saw it in relation to this episode. I didn't see anything about it from last week.
Yeah, it's loads of like TikTok videos and shorts and reels and stuff. Basically, the bread theory is that in last week's show, Sarah and Joel and Tommy were kept away from all kind of flour-related food products. So he forgot
Atkins and the
forgot to pick up his cake,
chocolate and the cookies, no cake.
Didn't eat the biscuits from the neighbour, all that kind of stuff, and
no pancakes for Tommy.
Yeah, and so they never got infected in episode 1, but evidently loads of other people did, and they referred to the flour mill in Jakarta being one of the biggest distribution places in the world. So no surprise that if this was ground zero, it would spread very, very quickly. He explains that it was the flour and grain factory, and then it kind of gets a little bit darker very quickly as the doctor starts to retrace the kind of steps of the infection of going, right, who bit them? It happened at this factory. Was anyone else bit? Yes, we caught them. What happened to them? A few hours passed, and they basically turned into, of course, what we know as runners, and military protocol suggests they kill them. And then who bit them? And the guy goes on to say there's 14 employees missing, Richie. Not just one on the loose, 14. Yeah. Which immediately, if you think of everything we went through with like pandemic and the spread of infection, you've got 14 of these fuckers out there already infected.
This is what I was about touch on to. That's the moment that number 14 is where she just loses hope. You see it in her act. It's phenomenal acting by her, actually.
Very subtle.
You see, like, there's the moment where she hesitates and then like she shakes because that taking that moment to think and what that means, she's just done the maths in her head.
Yeah, that ripple effect.
And that's why what she recommends is to basically nuke the city.
Yeah.
It seems an extreme response, but she's done the maths. 14 people out there. What that basically means is if you assume that, well, every single one of them bites another person, that's now 28. And then 56. And so it just exponential growth, and it's already been hours at this point.
Yep.
at least hours, probably maybe even days. So there could be literally already thousands of infected people out there.
Yeah, and that's just in the city, not factoring in
they don't
the
have
flower
a good
and yeast
idea
problem.
how quickly the infection spreads.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if the yeast is
well, she says
if the flower production is infected,
yeah,
then it's spread all over the world. It's done.
She does,
and that's why, like, she has that moment where it's like, I just want to be with her family. She knows she's fucked.
Yeah,
like,
she does say like the flower is like the perfect breeding ground for this type of fungi as well, which is like, oh great, it's just another problem. But yeah, that moment, like you said, she's visibly shaken, and he asks like what to do next, and her response is like very quietly, just there is no medicine, there is no vaccine. Bomb the shit out of the city.
You can vaccinate for like a fungus, because especially the way this fungus works, where it physically bores into you.
Yeah,
it's like vaccinating for breaking an arm.
I'm sure someone's tried it out there. And then she wants to be with her family. She's actively like starting to well up and stuff, knowing that her time's numbered. And then we just cut to do. We get the beautiful cinematic again. We discussed on last week's show. Absolutely, I think like every week as these episodes build up, I'm just gonna like be absolutely rocking out to this tune, like Game of Thrones. Whenever I used to hear the HBO, all the static, and then you hear the and you just like start off, you're like, oh, I'm in for it. We've got an hour of phenomenal television ahead of us. That's gonna happen every week with this show, I'm hoping. So, cold open, we're done. Let us know in the chat what you thought. Are you enjoying these flashbacks to kind of when the outbreak happened, getting a bit more behind the scenes information? Because again, we don't see this in the game. So yeah, it's
I'm
fantastic.
loving them so far.
Me too. Again, as someone's played the games, it's just more context for what we get to see, what we get to love and talk about. So moving on then, we get to Boston. We're back in present day. We're back with our crew. And it kind of opens up with a bird's eye view of Ellie asleep in the fetal position, which is kind of very interesting if you think about all the thought stylization of the show so far. And it's basically showing her almost like an embryo in a fetal position, which is the start of this spread and growth and evolution, potentially. We see her in this circle of sunlight, which I think will come into a little bit more, which hasn't really been explicitly explained in the show, but I do want to drill into it in the breakdown a bit more. We see Joel and Tess basically watching over her, and they probably have took shifts all through the night because they know this girl's bitten after the end of last episode, and they expect it to turn any moment now.
It's the way they're just full and staring at her as well. It's not absent-minded, keep an eye on it, no, it's just focus. Yeah.
Focus. And you can almost imagine their conversations through the night of going, like, don't get too close. You take first watch, I'll take second watch. And you're right. And as soon as she moves, Joel's like kind of ready on the gun already. And they just do not trust her at all anymore. But she hasn't turned. And then this is when Joel and Tess they probe with Ellie some questions about the bite mark. They argue a little bit about her future. She needs to go to the toilet. We all do first thing in the morning, right? And interestingly enough, when we first watched this, like Tess gives her a magazine and says, go in that room, there's no monsters in there. And I think Joel says, only you. Already, dick arsehole moves towards this little girl that he's supposed to be looking after. But clearly, he just doesn't give a shit. And my first thought, oh, look, Tess has given her a magazine to go read while she goes to the toilet. And then immediately double-checked, it's toilet paper, isn't it? And I was like, that's grim.
Yeah.
And that made me think, Richie, side note to the entire show, how awkward must wiping your ass be with those, like, like the quite, like, plastic pieces of paper? It's not like toilet roll. You know what I mean? It just doesn't seem like the right type of material you want to be wiping with. A leaf would be better.
I think in the circumstance in which they've been living, anything is better than nothing. Because imagine toilet paper might be a luxury.
It might be. Although in
last
episode,
but
they did say they're manufacturing bullets and pills at a factory somewhere. You've got to imagine toilet roll is one of those.
For Fedra.
That's true. Yeah, no, I mean, there's got to be a lot of toilet roll out in the wild. There'll be toilet roll and Twinkies, as we know from Zombieland. They will be out there en masse. But yeah, so they have that little discussion. Ellie goes off. There was a nice moment where I actually noticed that they kind of hang on Joel's hand a little bit, showing his injury from the last episode. So they're not kind of glossing over the fact that he's possibly like fractured some bones in his fingers or his hand from beating the hell out of that Fedra guy. And again, it's those subtle moments where we hang around on Joel to show that he's a broken man. He is still reeling back from essentially murdering someone the last episode, like a non-infected human.
It's not just that, he's got a bit of a hairline fracture, so it's a physical injury as well. And it's something they talk about in the run-up to the show where they don't want the characters to be like superhumans. And like last week when it came to the Robert stuff, and when you invade his compound, kill off 50 guys, they didn't want to do that because they just make like Joel look basically invulnerable.
Yeah.
Where they want him to be very vulnerable. Like, yeah, like there's consequences for everything he does. Like he's not safe. He's not a superhero. Like he's just a bloke who's got lucky.
Yeah, I'm waiting for that really funny moment when he wraps a bandage around his forearm and it fixes his hand somehow. Because that happens in the game quite a lot. No matter where you get shot or you get attacked by people, wrapping a bandage around your forearm, you're all good. That's how video games
Again,
work.
I think that'll be like he'll cut himself from some glass and just it'd be one of them little Easter egg moments.
Quick bandage, that makes sense. So again, while Ellie's gone, they kind of discuss. Joel wants to take her back to the quarantine zone. Tess kind of explains that if they take her back, she'll get scanned on the way, or she'll get scanned at some point, and they'll basically go, "Oh, she's negative," and they'll just kill her on the spot. So that's a dead end for Tess. She's like, no, we need to see this through. And there's obviously the kid has some future, and Joel's pretty much, I think he quote Joel, he says, "You need to stop talking about this kid like she's got some kind of life in front of her." Because from his point of view, she's bit. She's not long for this world. They will have to kill her. Even if she
wasn't, it's a pretty shitty world.
Yeah, absolutely. And we get kind of a little bit of fun back and forth between the two of them asking questions. The three of them, asking questions. And it turns out Ellie has way better travel snacks than Joel and Tess. She has a lovely chicken sandwich, I think, while they're stuck chewing on some dry jerky. And I did beg the question, Richie, upon my second viewing. Are they still making bread? Because she has a definitive slice of bread in a sandwich. Because I went really close, zoomed in, and thought, are they still using bread? No. So does this debunk the bakery theory, the bread theory?
No, I think the bakery theory was 100% confirmed in this episode. I think this is one of them, they probably just put it in Ellie eating a sandwich with bread to kind of emphasize her immunity.
Oh, I guess, yeah.
I mean, realistically, would you be messing around with grain with that at the moment, considering that's caused the outbreak?
Well, that's again. Is this a loophole in the story, or she could just have a couple of bits of chicken? Because again, bread doesn't keep fresh very long without all the additives we had. But
I think they needed to give us something that looked a bit more appetizing than just
it did.
You see, Joel got full on it's not a nice meal. He's not enjoying this. This is just sustenance. Yeah. He's got this nice looking sandwich. And then you got the contrast of Joel and Tess in the darkness and Ellie in the light.
Yeah.
And actually, there's a point mid-scene after the sandwich where Tess actually moves in between them. So she's kind of half in the darkness, half in the light.
Well, so
I think that's a very nice moment where it's it shows you where these characters are at this point in their journey, where Joel is still fully in the darkness. Tess is stepping out of it.
Oh, so you're kind of like a Kylo Ren thing going on there with the sunshine coming through.
More subtle, because Kylo Ren is bright.
I mean,
red,
yeah, of course.
I only caught that because I accidentally froze it on that scene.
Right. It's a great spot from kind of visual stylization. That's spot on. I think that explains that really, really well. So yes, Ellie has better travel snacks. I really wanted a sandwich after watching this scene. But again, back to the kind of the sunlight thing. It'll play into later on, but we might as well bring it up here as well. Is when she's in that kind of circle of sunlight where they've specifically obviously told her to sleep there. Why would you sleep with the sky above you when you could sleep in shade where you're not maybe going to get rained on, or you might be a bit warmer? And it does make you think that in the later scenes we'll get into it, but the sun seemingly impacts the infected in the TV world as opposed to the video game. There's a few bits we'll get into later on where when they're actively in sunlight, they seem to react to it in a negative way, similar to some classic zombies maybe would, or vampires, in fact, not even just zombies. But it's interesting that they specifically put Ellie in a ring of light and they kept in the shadows. And
well, this is just from their experience. We'll get into it in a bit when on the bridge in a bit, where actually not on the bridge. It's quite a bit later where they Tess is kind of explaining to Ellie almost the mechanics of the infected and how they always seem to be deep in buildings and it's rare for them to see them spill out into the streets. And that's why you get that whole thing where Ellie's just I thought there'd be loads of hordes everywhere. I was well, they tend to stay out. So I think this is probably putting her in the sunlight is just done by purely their observations. Tess and Joel have been out here tons of times. They've seen how the move, and they've probably seen the infected try to not be in the sunlight. I don't think it's a full-on vampire situation.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
just they tend to stay in dark, cold, damp areas.
I mean, like a mushroom, yeah. They like it, yeah, like a mushroom. And yeah, I guess that kind of like wraps out that conversation. And again, just as a side note, the director and Neil Druckmann on the official podcast were talking about that the fact that they did write a full backstory for Tess, but they never got around to showing it or shooting it because it didn't fit in, or they didn't have the budget for it for whatever reason. But yeah, the particularly going to say that Tess apparently had a husband and a son back in the old world who both got infected, and she ended up having to kill her husband, but she couldn't quite bring herself to kill her son. So he ended up being locked in a basement, and in theory, to this day, he's still locked in that basement in some form of clicker, bloater, whatever he's evolved into. And I think there's an interesting thread.
Which is arguably a worse fate.
I mean, yeah, arguably. But there is kind of that thread throughout why Tess is more involved in wanting to believe Ellie's immunity, because if she believes that there's any chance that a cure could come from this, there is a chance that her son potentially could be brought back around or survive or something. Again, very, very slim chance, but you can see Tess is way, way more bought into this adventure than Joel is. And I think that's, if that, even though obviously it's not canon because it's just the director talking about one of the thought process, but I think it adds a nice layer to Tess's character, which makes you realise as the episode goes on why she is more driven to see Ellie over the finish line, rather than Joel, who's just like, nope, I lost the person who's important to me. I don't give a shit. This world's cold. I am a ruthless kind of smuggler who just does what I need to do to survive.
Yeah. Tess just sees a potential route for redemption for the horrible shit she's done. Joel's just he's broken completely internally. It's just purely about getting through the next day, getting through the next day, getting through the next day. That's all Joel's existence is at this point.
Yeah.
It's why I think in the last episode you saw him like just quite happy, just taking a kid out of the back of the truck and just chucking it in the fire, happy to work the sewer stuff. He just doesn't care.
Yeah, he just.
I don't think he cares if he gets killed.
Yeah, he's just closed off to the world completely.
He exists till he exists no more, and that's it.
Wow, that's deep. So we finally get, again, Ellie explains her immunity story. She's apparently working on a cure because she's immune. They need to head out west. And either way, Tess says like they get what they want. Whether they take her and she turns out to not be immune, or they take her and she is, it doesn't matter. They get what they want, which is the battery in the car, and they can head off and find Tommy, which ultimately is Joel's goal. He wants to find out what's going on with Tommy. And the kind of scene ramps up with, I love it, where they kind of pick up the gun and Ellie just says, "Can I have a gun?" They both kind of retort and say, "Absolutely not." And she just says, "Okay, Jesus, I'll just throw my fucking sandwich at them then." Which
Such
I thought
an
was
Ellie response.
It is, yeah. It's just kind of an off the cuff, quick line, and yeah, it made me chuckle anyway. They go out, they exit, they go out into the streets, and on the route to kind of the main thing, we kind of now start to see the city a bit closer up, destroyed, of course, by the bombardments that was aforementioned by the lady in Jakarta, where she says we'll bomb the city. They clearly did it as a global plan rather than just limited to Indonesia. Did
you catch, actually, when they leave like the building where they spent the night, the sound of the door opening?
I may have commented it onto the wife. Did it sound like a clicker or something?
100% straight from the game's clicker noise.
Right, that's interesting.
It was to the point where I didn't even think it was even subtle. It was like, it worked, but it was like, when I watched the episode for the first time last night, I was like, maybe you should have put a bit more like just general door squeak in there to mask it a little bit. But it was like, yeah, it was just one of them little Easter eggs.
I did notice when he moved the cabinet out the way of it.
Yeah.
The door then opened.
Triangle.
The door then opened outwards.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, like, if someone was to try to get in, they could still just open the door and crawl under the cabinet. Like, I thought the cabinet was a buffer to stop the door being opened, but
if it's an infected, if the door blows open, there's still a barrier or something.
Safe from infected velociraptors. Yeah, clever girl, they get in, no problem. But anyway, we head out on the streets. We see everything's destroyed. Ellie comments on like the kind of bombardments, and they continue the journey as Tess tries to basically build more of Ellie's backstory. She explains about going into the abandoned mall in the QZ, which she thought was going to be empty. That's where she ultimately got bitten by one of the runners. Tess does ask her a few kind of probing questions about it, saying, were you with anyone? And she says no, she was on her own, which again, spoilers if you've not played the game.
Often no boyfriend. You mean, when she goes in the mall.
She doesn't mention spoilers again, folks, her friend Riley from the game. So she wasn't on her own in the mall, and we no doubt are going to see flashbacks in the next couple of episodes, maybe showing how Ellie got the initial bite. But yeah, you're right. The reference, like, she's an orphan, she's got no family, no boyfriend. Again, she doesn't respond to the boyfriend thing, because we know from the game Ellie is a lesbian or bi, or something she prefers. She doesn't like boys, basically. And then, so they kind of don't really go into that, but Tess is just kind of digging away at it, trying to find out what goes on. And Ellie references a few stories.
This is what I mentioned earlier, exposition done very well.
Mm.
It's a natural conversation between two characters in context of what they would generally probably be talking about anyway, but it's giving a lot of exposition to the audience.
Yeah, we're just along for the ride, watching them chat back and forward. And Ellie specifically says about why are they out in the wild and they're not being totally overrun. Like, where are the hordes, where are all these clickers and monsters that she's heard all of these stories about. And she mentions the super infected that explode fungus spores on you, which immediately is someone who's like, we know the games. We're like, aha, you just wait, Ellie, you just wait, because she's either referencing a bloater, which is the kind of like the final stage of one of the final stages of infection, where they kind of rip off big pustules on their body and throw them like little fungus grenades at you.
No bloaters are in the show because it's in the trailer.
They're in the trailer. Or it could be the Shamblers, which make an appearance in Last of Us Part 2, where I think if the infected basically live in a damper environment, they evolve into Shamblers instead of bloaters. So you kind of get two evolutions, similar to a Pokemon, a little bit different.
I took this to be bloaters, to be honest, because I think it's unlikely to bring Shamblers in when this early, when they're staying fairly close to the first game.
Mm-hmm.
And if Shamblers aren't in the first game, bloaters are, and we know bloaters are in the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Makes sense for this to be hinting at bloaters.
Yeah, and then she also references infected that kind of have had their heads split in two, and they use bat sensors to see, which we know that's echolocation that the clickers use, because their heads, essentially their eyeballs and their brain, have been cracked open and the fungus has grew out from them, which we'll meet some of these fellas in just a short time. But again, just like you said, Rich, she gives us a good bit of exposition without directly looking down the camera and going, there are some monsters to come up. There are problems. Ellie was not in the mall. So it's setting the tone for when these flashbacks do happen. We have more context on them. So again, great storytelling. And Chris in the chat says, yeah, music is superb, true to the game, which again, throughout the whole show so far, just the little subtle tones, the nods, the references to the video game. Again, the way they use the kind of hunter theme from the game for when anything sinister's happening, they have those like deep beats play out, and it just really, really pulls me in. So really, really good. We get to a hotel, which I want to shout out. The hotel, again, using some video game sets, but in a different manner.
Yeah.
This is clearly the hotel that we shouldn't be at until a little bit further in the game, but they've brought it in earlier because I'm guessing there's no set piece for it as they move on to Bill and Frank.
I think this would be the next thing, if I remember rightly. This is the thing in the game that happens after pretty much the end of the episode. This is where I think you go next.
Absolutely. But with us going on to see Bill and Frank, I think this is just basically a way of taking the hotel setting and bringing it forward into the TV show.
They were probably, when they were trying to figure out the show, like, well, it doesn't make sense further. It makes sense further in the game as a game, but like, well, if it doesn't fit as a show, we could repurpose the set somewhere else. Well,
in the video game, it's just a way to give you 5 levels of exploration and enemies to fight. There's no actual story happens in the hotel. It's just some way to pad out the video game for 2.5 hours of action and fighting, or stealth, depending on how you approach it. And then
it establishes that Ellie can't swim, which I'm guessing will come back later.
Absolutely, yeah. So
in a hilarious way, actually.
Yeah. Flooded hotel. Ellie can't swim. We get the introduction of Piano Frog. Shout out to Piano Frog. Just want to say, Piano Frog is probably going to be a meme across the course of the week. We see a frog on a piano playing some horror chords as though he knows what he's doing. And I did see on Twitter, Neil Druckmann tweeted out, I don't know if you've seen this yet, Richie, there originally was supposed to be Piano Seagull or Piano Bird or something, because I think the bird originally was supposed to be on the piano and he eats the frog on the piano. CGI frog, by the way. No real frogs were harmed in the making of The Last of Us HBO. And again, it just sets the scene from like an overclaimed world. Wildlife is back. Nature's retook this entire hotel reception. It's flooded, not up past the waist, which, as you said there, when they go into saying Ellie can't swim.
Like Joel walks down the steps into like He's just about maybe shin deep in the water as he's going down the steps. And then he's like, "Oh my god, I can't swim. You really need to go over there." And Joel just says like, he overdoes it. He just like a little hop down. He's like, it's literally one step before he's at the bottom, and she's like, "How was I meant to know?" Like,
I mean, she would, right? There's no pools in the quarantine zone, so if you've never swam before, then I guess water's a scary thing.
I took this as a nice little moment of the kind of sort of banter you do get from Joel and Ellie later. This is kind of like, this is
giving each other shit.
Of yeah. But there again, Joel gives Sarah shit. Joel and Sarah give each other shit as well.
They do.
That relationship coming to fruition again.
Mm-hmm. And I think Ellie holds that quite well because she is an intelligent young girl. We've seen that from episode 1. And again, a type of comedy and a humor is very dry and very witty. And we saw that actually back in the previous scene when they say, "If we so much as hear a noise out of you," and she mimics a clicker, and Tess is like, "Don't. That's not even funny." And she's like, "All right, okay, I get it."
But in the first episode, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Fuck you.
Yeah. So she again setting the scene. So a couple of new lines in there for Ellie, but very, very good character development to show that they're maybe cold with each other, but they can still have this kind of sibling rivalry almost back and forth. So we work our way through the hotel. A brief scene. She knocks over a skeleton, maybe getting a bit too comfortable in her environment already. Like, she doesn't know what's out here, but very quickly she's happy to mess around with like the hotel gear, and a skeleton jumps out on her and she bricks it a little bit.
It's one of them brief moments where you actually see her just being like a young teenager, just being a kid for a bit, and just like,
"I'd like your finest room, please, at the Plaza Hotel." But yeah, we make our way up to the rooftops. We see a street filled with infected, laying out on there, kind of like little slugs. Outside a building, and again, this is what I wanted to refer back to. Seemingly not that happy. I don't know if you realise, like, a ray of sun passes over them. They all kind of like roll over as it passes over the entire crew on the floor. And because sunlight's not really a thing in the game, it did make me wonder. Like, they're all on the floor and they all reel back from it and kind of go, "Get away from me." And I'm wondering if that's going to probably play a bigger part further down the line as we get to like Bill and Frank's town, and maybe they don't attack during the day, or maybe they're slow during the day, because we know from part 2 the snow sometimes slows them down a little bit, so elements could impact it. And as you said, mushrooms prefer the dark, so maybe this is just all the fungi in their heads and their brains who are like, "Ooh, get it out of my face."
Just like by travel during the day, try and stay don't enter like, try and avoid entering like dark places, which maybe like later on in the game when they get to the the tunnel area, that might be one of them. We don't have a choice, we have to go through there even though we really don't want to because it's pitch black down there. It might be that kind of just putting these little nuggets of lore in there.
Yeah, it was really interesting. Tess then goes on to explain what I think is one of the best additions to the TV show that differs from the game. Is she explains a fungal network underground, which I'm not gonna dub, but I'm gonna call it the Wood Wide Web. And there's a reason I'm calling it this, and I'll get onto it in a moment. But she explains, fungal network underground that connects essentially all the infected for over a mile that can span out. And if you step on a patch in one place, it can alert infected things somewhere else to your presence. And I think from a horror element and a world building element, this is just fantastic, because it adds risk to anywhere and everywhere you go.
Yeah, they've removed the risk of the spores, but they've added a different risk to kind of keep the stakes high, and it kind of makes sense in the context of the game as well. Because if you alert one, suddenly you can get swarmed a bit.
Absolutely,
so it just adds that like.
It's like you trip over a branch or you knock a tree, and within a few minutes you could be like just rained down by infected. So it makes everything extra precautious and careful. And I think in the context of, like you said, taking the spores out, it's that element of threat, like that perceived threat that you might not be able to see all the time. And it does play into it very, very importantly near the end of the episode. But one of the reasons I wanted to reference the Wood Wide Web specifically is if you thought episode 1 with the cold opening, when they talk about the fungus infecting humans, and there's ants that get infected by this and they go up to the canopy and they come out their head, go check out BBC's The Green Planet with David Attenborough, specifically the episode titled Seasoned Worlds, because he talks about this Wood Wide Web, where basically they show you how all the plants in a forest, all the trees in a forest are connected to a point where if there's, say, like leaf cutter ants who are cutting all the leaves off, the trees can secrete like a type of wax to basically deter the ants from ripping apart one tree. But using this web underneath the ground, they can tell other trees in the forest to basically prepare this kind of substance to deter the ants from then attacking them. So they all share information, share nutritions all through this connected fungal network in real life, in the real world.
I'm pretty sure the biggest organism on this planet is actually a fungus. I think it's literally miles of single like underground wood wide webness.
Wood wide webness, yeah. And pardon me. Another great episode is Netflix's Our Planet, specifically the Jungles episode, which again is also another fantastic David Attenborough production documentary. And again, he goes into the benefits of fungi and how they impact ants and everything. Kind of all the stuff that was explained in the first cold opening of episode 1. But real world. So if you enjoy nature documentaries, if you're a fan of David Attenborough, any of his Planet Earth stuff, then check out them 2 shows, because not only does it add fear and horror to the real world elements of this, but as soon as Tess brought it up, I thought, that's just fantastic. They've took a real world thing once again and tweaked it for the horror of the show. That, you step on a little mushroom over here and there's a clicker 2 miles away that's going, I'm going to head south now in this particular direction where all these people...
I'm being attacked down the south.
Yeah. It's a network. It warns others of danger in the area, or potential food and nutrients and whatnot. Either way, they go on about the long way of the shot, where they decide to head into the museum, which is a fantastic to be in. It's a huge set piece from the video game. Again, just another area to basically kill things and scavenge things. But in terms of the show, it adds for a nice kind of dark, dusty, dilapidated building where we get introduced to loads of corpses all over the stairs. We see like kind of mushrooms growing out of them a little bit. They go up, they slowly work their way through it. The ceiling collapses, very video gamey behind you. You go into a room and then there's no way back. It's like oh, the wooden beam just gave way. That's the moment
in the game where you always go, I'm still exploring the area.
I've missed a trophy now because I didn't pick up that one thing in the other room, and there's no way of going back without restarting. Yeah, very much video game trope 101. But then more importantly, the noise brings on the clickers. The first time we see the clickers, of course, sponsors of this very show, the ClickerCast, after all. Someone last week said, why was the show called the ClickerCast? It was I guess if you've not played the game, it makes no sense yet.
We missed the bit where they encounter what looks like a relatively fresh corpse.
That's true. Good
and
point.
Like Ellie's like, I've literally been attacked by these myself. Like talking about runners, it doesn't look like that.
That is a great point.
And then that's where they have the moment where it's like, from this moment, it's not quiet, it's silent.
Yeah.
Like,
because we know, clickers come running in. And from what the brief things we know about Fedra, the clickers are the 3rd stage of the infection, where essentially, like I said, the brain, the eyes, everything's cracked open, taken over. The fungus is fully in control, but they can't see anymore. So to navigate and hunt, they have to do echolocation, which is your clicking and your noises to hear sounds reverberate back off solid objects.
There's an argument that they should have probably talked about what the nature of clickers are to Ellie while they're back on the bridge. Yeah, because there was an opportunity there. Or when Joel and Ellie was sat in the corridor, there was another opportunity to kind of talk about stuff. When Ellie's asking Joel about if he's killed and what it's kind of... Is it hard knowing that there used to be people kind of thing? I think they've just done it just for the tension for the TV show. Yeah,
that's a great point. And actually, the showrunners did discuss that in the podcast, saying that when they were shown the early version off to someone at HBO, they didn't understand what was going on. And they went back for reshoots to that scene where Joel specifically says, like, he points and says, like, no eyes, be quiet. Because when they watched it back, the whoever they showed it to also didn't know. And I guess, Jin in the chat says they haven't even been called clickers yet in the episode. So
that could be the whole thing in TV shows where they don't actually call them things. It's very rare that a modern zombie show calls anything a zombie. It might just be that thing. They're not referring to them. They might do later. Like, I could see that being between like Ellie and Joel later in the show, like clicker, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's the clicky one. It's the clicker one or something like that. Yeah.
But it was like on the bridge. I think it could have been nice, like kind of Ellie and Joel, like Joel or Tess have mentioned, like when Ellie's kind of describing the clicker, go, yeah, they exist, but with the bloaters, like
they
probably haven't seen a bloater.
Yeah. Well, Tess says, like, I hope not, when she describes the bloater. So again, we might get to it. Like, let's face it, these might not be the official terms Fedra gave to them. It's probably just infected stage 1, 2, 3, and 4. Similar to in The Walking Dead, like every region they go to, they call them walkers. They call them. I can't remember. It's been that long since I watched The Walking Dead, but I feel like every new season they meet a group of people who refers to them as something different. Because again, you wouldn't all, I guess in the real world, we'd all just call them zombies, right? We wouldn't refer to them as anything else. Unless they started clicking at us, Richie, and we might just refer to them as clickers. But yeah, we get some really tense moments where they come running in, rah, click, 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 all over the place. I can do a much better impression, but I've told myself I'm not going to do it on the podcast because it's probably embarrassing for me to get into the zone to do it. I might put a soundbite. I might put a soundbite at the end of the episode, and you can judge me next week. But after some tension building moments, we see the clickers kind of come in. Our crew gets separated, and we get that. Well, before they get separated, I guess we get that really horror building moment where they're behind the glass museum cabinet. And it's just ultimate like horror. Silhouette of the clicker behind them. You can hear the guttural kind of noises coming from this monster. And Ellie's like trying really, really hard to control her breathing. Remember, this is a 14-year-old girl who's seeing something with a mushroom exploded head, just ran into the room and is now essentially hunting them in the dark. So, yeah, no surprise she's a bit scared and can't quite get a breath back. Guy creeps around the corner. Best time to cough, sorry. And then
even Tess and Joel look absolutely terrified in this moment. They're like,
they are.
This is not a good situation. Yeah,
absolutely. And we see it, and then all shit pops off. Joel has to shoot, get a few shots off. I think Joel gets jumped on by one of them. Another one runs in from the side. Tess gets separated from them, notably.
Yeah, Tess grabs Ellie and runs a different direction, runs away from them.
Yeah, and
like Joel is like basically having a fight with one.
Yeah, and we get some really good just classic horror moments where the clickers, if you can get a bit of distance behind them, they can't see you, so you can it's almost like a video game. If you run away from the bad guys far enough, they just lose interest or lose sight of you, and then the whole stealth game starts again.
You see this, Joel actually kind of understands this. He's not running in a straight line. He's diving in and out of rooms, and then he actually pushes one of like the statuesque busts over to break a mirror. And he goes the other way to create like sound in two directions.
Yeah, which again,
and that gives them the opportunity to kind of lose it a bit.
Yeah,
and this brings us on to the moment where he's kind of like where I described earlier. He goes into almost like full on listen mode while he's slowly reloading his pistol.
Yeah, and again that's one of the best shots. He's got the torch jammed between his neck, and he's trying to quietly load because he's got a revolver, right? So you can't just reload them. Stick a cartridge in. He's got to manually.
Well, you can't just spin it and drop it because that makes noise. So he's
like
slowly trying to take them out, not make it sound.
And we've all been there, right? Trying to carry too many things upstairs from the kitchen, where you've got your glass, you've got your plate, you're juggling your cutlery on it, and you're trying to make your way open and shut the door, turn the lights off all at the same time. He's trying to do while there's this ferocious monster just 2-3 meters away. And again, the way the camera does the shot down the long corridor. He's in the light, it's in the dark. You can see it kind of freaking out behind him in the background. And then the camera pans
so close onto Joel.
It does. And out of shot, the clicker disappears. So we as an audience can't see the clicker as well, but you can hear it getting closer and closer and louder.
That's why I describe it as Joel in listen mode, because he can't see it. So he's trying to hear where it is. Mm-hmm. He's trying to use the whole echolocation thing against it.
Yeah, and it's brilliant. And again, shout out to that shot because it is very reminiscent of the original E3 PlayStation trailer from back in 2011, 2012, where he's loading the gun and they come bursting down the corridor and him and Ellie jump out with it. Either way, they make it out to seemingly safety, top of the museum. They're all obviously very rattled. And again, spoilers for the rest of the episode, but it wasn't as safe as an experience for Tess as it was for Joel.
There's something I just noticed actually when after he takes down the first clicker, the second one that ran after Tess comes running down the corridor at him. But actually I noticed just then with the first clicker, he fully unloads his gun. You see him pull the trigger a couple of times and nothing happens after it's dead. So that was his last round. And as he sees this other clicker come running at him, he actually steps in front of Ellie and pushes Ellie behind him.
Yeah, so he's getting protective already.
Yeah, I didn't notice that in my first watching, I've just saw it. I was like, oh, that's a subtle. It's a subtle detail.
Interesting.
But it is Joel being a father.
Interesting. Again, it might be one of those instinctive reactions that we might all do in that
pure
scenario.
instinct.
But yeah, protect the child kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, interesting to see. So yes, we think Tess has hurt ankle. Ellie's been bitten again, which I think is just brilliant because that doesn't happen in the game. Like, she has her original bite, but I do think it sets a good precedence for the kind of the climax of this episode of where Ellie's been bit and she's kind of like rubs off and goes, "Oh shit!" Like, oh well, I guess if it was going to be one of us, might as well be me because
It's how nonchalant she. Oh fuck.
Like and Tess has a great line where she does say to Ellie, I think earlier on in the episode, of like, you're not immune to being ripped apart.
Yeah.
Which is like a great thing. It's like, yeah, this is serious. Like, you might be immune to being bitten, but one of these things could just rip your neck open and you could bleed out just as easily. So be careful of that.
I think this is actually important in the show as well, because this is the second time Ellie's being bit. But this time, there's no doubting how she got that injury.
Yeah.
So Tess and Joel know that this was she was bitten by an infected.
Mm-hmm.
So it sets it up nicely later, where the other one, that could be a scar from anything.
Yeah.
She's saying she was bitten before and she's infected, but again, they don't know for sure.
Could be an acid burn. That's what she tells people in the second. But in terms of this, Tess is clearly rattled. I think as an audience, we suspect something's up because her whole demeanor changes. And even though it's just her ankle, she seems... There's just everything about her just is different. Her whole character is changed a little bit. They kind of pursue on to the Capitol building. I love the point when Ellie just goes across the plank of wood. When he's like, "Oh, be careful. I know it's a bit high. You might be a bit scared."
That's scary. It's like, that was scary. This is wood.
Yeah. Which is just like classic Ellie again. Again, nice scene from the video game when they go over the planks across the rooftops. And again, just a very iconic moment. We head to the Capitol building and Tess is like, right, we got to get there quick. We need to get, like, she's, even with her bad ankle, she's out front, ahead of the two of them, leading the way towards, like, up this big avenue street towards the Capitol building. And again, as an audience, we know what happens. We know what has happened to Tess. If you watch it back, Richie, there's a moment when, as she's leading out ahead of them, she glances back to where Joel and Ellie are behind her. Yeah. And you can see blood on her neck already.
Well, that's probably one of the reasons why not only is she out in front to try and drive them forward, she doesn't want them to see, so she's out in front so they can't see. Where if she was behind, there's always a chance that Joel looks behind, so it's like,
absolutely. Chris in the chat says, "You watch each episode with a pen and pad?" No, actually, I watch it once with my wife and then I watch it a second time and take some brief notes so that we can break it down for you, my friend. And
I am watching it as we talk,
and Richie then has it up in front of him as well, so we can kind of just piece it together bit by bit. If there's anything we missed, Chris, let us know. We'd love to talk about it. Not too granular detail, though, because we could go down to fungi levels. But yeah, they reach the building, and there's bodies everywhere, just like in the video game, except for it's not Fedra this time. It is supposedly the Fireflies they were destined to meet and hand Ellie over to. So Tess immediately is like, shit. Just like in the video game, like, crap, this was our handoff point. This was the end of our journey. And Tess, again, knowing that she's bit, knowing that she's got limited time, immediately rattling through everything, like flipping cases over, swearing. She's not happy at all.
Looking for a map. There's some lines straight from the game as well in this scene.
Yeah, chucking everything on the floor. And then we get to that point again where Ellie calls her out and she's like, "Oh shit, she's infected." And yeah, Joel's like, again, fantastic acting in the moment from like Pedro. We're just showing the kind of emotion without having to say anything. It's just all in his kind of demeanor changes. Like, he's reluctant to get near. I think at one point he kind of goes to almost like talk to her like you would do if you found out someone was ill in the family or something. You want to embrace them, but he kind of reels back a little bit, like, shit, I can't get near you now. Even though like they've supposedly got like a relationship together. And they might have done for many, many years. Like, they are the closest people to each other supposedly in this entire world. And all of a sudden, as soon as he sees that bite mark, he's like, I can't even get close to you. These tendril things might start popping out, as we know. So yeah, shit. Ellie's like, fuck. It's just, everything is just bad. Everything's gone south. And then they start arguing back and forth. She's like, you need to get ahead of Bill and Frank. And again, this is what I loved about the Ellie being bit a second time. Yeah. Because it wasn't just in the video game where she kind of rolls up her sleeve and says, like, look, this is real. This was 2 weeks ago. Mine's already worse. You have that exact time comparison where Ellie was bit, 2 hours ago. Tess was bit 2 hours ago. Hers is just a little mark she can rub away, and hers is already turned into this horrible, like, gangrenous mushroom thing.
We know, actually, in the TV show, the timeline is a lot quicker. I think it's something like, I think in one of the Fed reports,
2 hours.
So one, it's something like an hour or two max, especially from a neck bite, where I think in the game it could be days before the infection fully takes.
You're right.
Which kind of does change. I mean, it changes this scene a little bit, but not really, because in the scene in the game, and what we're about to, like, basically Tessa's last stand, she knows she's down.
Yeah.
And she's buying time for them because it's Fedra attacking. Where in the show, she knows she's gone very soon. Yeah,
absolutely. And you see her arm twitch automatically. I think she hides her arm behind her back, which, as you said, the higher up towards your brain, I guess it is, the quicker these infections take place. She says, go Bill and Frank again, so she references Bill and Frank to get on it. Then one of these infected on the floor comes back to life. Joel kills it with a headshot.
It's just so cool the way he just goes, bang, so casual.
Puts it down. And, of course, a throwback to earlier in the episode where we now see the hand, kind of the tendrils come up through the hand from the fungus on the ground. And again, knowing what we know about the wood wide web and the fungal network underground, we see little tendrils go up. And disgustingly, for discussing part number 2 in the episode, Richie, you see one of them go under the thumbnail. That really freaked my wife out, where it was like, it's went under the nail. Like, that's just not a nice thing anyway. Which, as we know, it then cuts to another infected, like, further down the road, supposedly, like, less than a mile away.
The ones we saw from the rooftop earlier.
Yeah, it's a good, like, kind of world building. We know where they're coming from, how far away they have to travel to get there. But again, back to this fungal network, they know exactly where Joel, Tess, and Ellie are because of this network. It's
because all the same creature, and they know where they were hurt.
Yeah, like if I stabbed you in the leg right now, you'd know which leg it was.
Yeah, that's literally basically the kind of concept.
It's your nervous system. It's like, I've been stabbed. Apologies for stabbing you in the leg.
I've just been shot in the head. 2 miles down the road.
2 miles down the road. But yeah, so we know stuff's happening. I think there's a fantastic line where Joel kind of like pops his head out the door and Tess says, like, how many are coming? And he's like, all of them.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not even like a couple we can deal with. It's like all of them from down the street. You know, the 50 plus of them we saw rolling around getting a suntan earlier on. Yeah. It's them. It's all of them coming right for us.
And the ones in the buildings.
Yeah, everything. We see again, like, Tess says, like, get her out of here. He very.
It's how quickly Tess, just without all of them, just starts pouring down barrels of oil and
grenades,
petrol and grenades. Like, she knows she's done. She knows she's done very soon. She wasn't planning on ever leaving that building.
Mm-hmm.
Her plan was probably to shoot herself in the head. You'd imagine, or ask Joel to do it.
Yeah,
like, finish me off. Like, we're done. I'm not leaving.
Yeah. Well, in the game,
he's like,
in the game, she says, like, I won't turn into one of those things. So, like, she's not willing to let it. And again, when it's Fedra, she's got kind of that standoff.
It's that last stand. It's Tessa's last stand. It's absolute badass moment for her in the game. But this is badass in a different way. Like,
yeah, completely. She just accepts her fate and she's like, look, I'm bit. I know what's happening. I'm going to buy you time. And then again, Joel very aggressively grabs Ellie by, like, the scruff of her neck and says, like, get out of here. No goodbyes, nothing like that. It's just, let's go.
They hesitate, like, they're quite close together and they're just looking each other in the eye. And it's like, you can tell there's something there. They can tell that they want to say goodbye in a different way, but they just can't. So he just has to turn and go.
Yeah, again, this is how Joel deals with things, just switches off and says, like, let's get on with it. I'm very interested to see how he deals with the fallout of Tess's death in next week's episode, because Bill and Frank knew Tess as well, so I'm interested to see how that dynamic is going to play out. But yeah, the room's, again, covered in kind of oil at this point, lighter fluid, gasoline, whatever it is. She has a lighter. That trusty lighter in all TV and movies that just will not light. They come bursting through the doors. Interestingly enough, they seemingly ignore Tess. They just kind of barrel straight past her as she's just stood up against one of the pillars.
Noise. She's backed against the wall. They're running towards the noise.
But they're not all clickers. They're, like, infected, so it's like they have eyes.
Yeah.
So, but then again, we'll get on to this next conversation point of. There's one guy takes a fancy to her. They're all kind of, like, slightly out of focus. Like, they're using focus really, really well in this show. They're all barreling past her. And then, one just stops. He turns to her and he gives her the eye. The romantic music sets in, Richie. He makes his, like, walk towards her, checking you out, pins her up against the wall, and then what does he do?
I like the tentacles on this lady.
He just straight up sticks his big dirty tendrils down her throat in the third most gruesome thing to happen in this week's episode of The Last of Us. And yeah, he just passionately embraces Tess, and it's disgusting, quite frankly. It's unsettling on many, many levels. And the director of the show, Craig Mazin, did talk about it and say, like, they wanted it to be disturbing. There's like, how many zombie flicks have you seen where people get tore apart, ripped to shreds, eaten, entrails ripped out, and it's kind of like, it's horror, we get that, but they said they wanted something to create something disturbing, and there is something incredibly disturbing about a kiss, because a kiss is supposed to be like passionate and nice, and it's like not a octopus tendril thing getting jammed down your throat, and it's disturbing.
And it's, bear in mind, about 30 seconds before, you had that moment where like it's clearly like Joel and Tess do want to kiss each other goodbye. No, they can't.
Yeah, it's very juxtaposed to that.
It's very disturbing in that. My initial thought was it's quite gratuitous, but then like on further thought, it's like, actually, no, I get why they do it. They do need to keep putting these things in to make you feel really uncomfortable about the whole situation. Yeah,
and I've seen a lot of people out there, like Meg in the chat, saying, yeah, it's very disturbing. It took away from the moment, and I can completely agree with that. I think there was a big build up to similar to the game where Tess is like ready to sacrifice herself for Joel and Ellie's kind of case, and she's ready, and she's got a last stand, and she's got the
I think this is
lighter ready. It could have been epic.
This was more of a human way you'd respond to the situation. Although she's decided she's going to go out in this blaze of glory, she's still panicked. She's still backing up into the wall, where in the game, she's pretty much stood there with a rifle ready to take on whatever comes through that door.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it could have been like door kicks in, gunshot, headshot, buddy shot. They jump onto her, and then as she goes down, she drops the lighter. Boom, we get this epic explosion, and she's gone out in a blaze of glory. However, I do want to dissect this a little bit more, because I can see the chat talking about the differences.
Yeah.
We know Tess is already an hour or so into this infection. She's in a very fungal network area, as we saw.
She's almost gone.
She could be like 98% fungi convert at this point. And she's got herself to the wall, her body's shutting down. These infected come running in, and the reason they don't acknowledge her is because she's already one of them. She's already literally fighting the last parts of her brain. It's trying to stay awake. Almost similar. I don't want to go down the road, but almost like
describe the kiss as like kind of connecting it to the network.
Well, that's where I kind of approach. Like when I was thinking about it after the credits rolled, I was thinking like, obviously she's already infected. They know she's infected. How long does infection take place? But then she's almost, in my mind, similar to kind of like a stroke victim in a way. Like she has consciousness, but she doesn't have the ability to have any body. She already lost control of her arm just moments ago. She's already twitching.
Yeah, she's struggling to get the lighter going, and I kind of took that as like she's just her motor functions. She's losing control of her motor
functions. It's not just the shitty lighter that she's got, but then when
it's not a shitty lighter. It's a very nice lighter, Sam Drake's lighter.
It is, yeah. Reference that is a lighter from Uncharted, so a good Naughty Dog reference in there. But yeah, when she's against the wall and they kind of come flooding in, like her last thing is like her you can almost see it in her eyes as this creepy guy's sticking his tendrils down her neck. Like maybe she can't react to that. Maybe she's so far gone that she's literally stood in a frozen panic, connected to the network already, and the last element, the last ounce of humanity she has left, her sanity, her brain function, is to flick this lighter as many times as she can, and then thankfully the last flick, the lighter comes good, of course, again, boom, whole floor goes up. Again, shout, I think Chris mentioned it further in the chat, but maybe just use the grenade next time, Tess. Like if you've got a dodgy lighter, just take a pin out of a grenade, just hold it like the Terminator 2 guy.
Yeah, the thing with a grenade is it's panic as well. She's panicked. She's in a horrible situation. She's tossed them all over the floor. Like she's convinced Joel to go, and then as they break through the door, she's backed up into a wall.
Yeah.
It might just be a case of she just didn't have hold of one.
Yeah.
She's got a lighter. I've got this'll do.
Yeah.
Because if she steps out, maybe she doesn't light anything.
Yeah.
Like
absolutely. But
it's one of them situations. Like it's so like. I don't think you could ever realistically experience that kind of the stress of that situation. It's like you're trying to take your own life, but you're getting prevented from this tentacle monster inside of you, and like it's just I don't think there's a good way you can handle that in like and it's one of them situations until you're in it. there's no way to know how you respond.
Yeah.
And considering the outcome of the situation, there's no way to know how anyone would respond.
No, and again, yeah, it diverges a little bit from the video game, but I can completely see where it's maybe a bit too much. And I don't think we've seen the end of these tendril deaths, and they clearly understand that they can freak their audience out by the coming out of the mouth. But it makes me think: is the showrunners like everyone I know is like talking about that part now, that moment, because you were expecting it to get ripped apart in a blaze of glory and an explosion. And what happened instead? Everyone's like, oh, it was so like personal and intimate, and why would it do that? And that's maybe just how one spore gets on with another spore.
Yeah.
But then, building explodes. We see Joel's already gone. He's like well ahead off camera. And we get the moment where Ellie she's trying to compose herself as like the Capitol buildings on fire behind her. And the show just like ends, cuts to black, where she's clearly like traumatized by the whole situation. She's just knowingly, I guess, got someone killed in a way by proxy of her already. So now Riley's happened that we don't know in the show yet. Now Tess is gone. And it's just Marlene's shot somewhere, and she's just a 14-year-old girl thinking, all this is happening around me because of me, in a way. And now I'm with this guy who doesn't want me. And for all we know, Joel's fucked off back to the quarantine zone now. And she's just
Tess
like,
was
stood
the only
there.
person keeping Joel from killing her.
Yeah, so a bit of an odd one to end on. But we fade to the credits again. And that is the end of episode 2 of The Last of Us. Not bad at all. Terrific episode. I think we round out each show by talking about certain aspects. So I think, Richie, I'll throw it over to you for these ones. Your performance of the week. In chat, do let us know. What was your performance of the week? Was it Tess, Joel, Ellie, one of the many clickers, or was it the sandwich in Ellie's backpack? Richie, what do you think?
Oh, I did have a very clear idea of this, but then now you throw the sandwich in the mix.
What am I going to do? Throw that fucking sandwich at you?
Yeah, I think this is Anatolov's episode. This is Tessa's episode. Like, throughout the entire episode, there was so much of a I mean, again, Pedro and Bella, amazing throughout the entire episode. But I think because this is very much the episode's built around, it's building up Tess throughout the episode, then to like almost like pull the rug under you. And she does such an amazing job. She's the emotional heart of this episode, and it comes through in the performance so well.
I'd completely agree with that. Yeah, Tess.
The MV scientist at the start as well. I don't know the actress's name, but she did phenomenal.
She did, yeah. She really set the groundwork for what this episode came to be. But yeah, I think, Jem, we're with you in the chat as well. Yeah, Tess MVP for this episode. Absolutely, yeah. Jin in the chat as well wants to mention the scientist at the beginning. Yeah, she really just kind of set the tone for what this world has become. And I'm curious, Richard, do you think every week we're basically going to give it to a supporting character and we're never going to get quite around to giving it to Ellie or Joel? Because I feel like next week we're going to give it to Nick Offerman as Bill. And it's going to be like, the next week it's going to be Tommy, then next week it's going to be whoever. And
I know, but it's just like, because the episode like keeps centering around these other characters a bit.
Yeah. Again, yeah, we don't know. Like, we haven't really had time with just Joel and Ellie yet. I think we won't get that maybe until season, like to episode 4 or 5. So, but there's still time.
I don't think we'll ever. I don't think we'll have a full episode that is just on Joel and Ellie, because I think you might have half an episode here, half an episode there.
Yeah, Jem mentions MVP is whoever dies so far. Yeah, you got to give it to them, because we can't give it to them beyond this. But I think, yeah, Tess definitely gets this one. Moving on, moment of the week. So what was your favourite moment of this week's episode? Chat, throw yours out there as well.
I don't know.
Was it the frog? Sednar says piano
frog.
Frog
was good. Piano frog deserves recognition. Apparently Piano Seagull wasn't very good, so I'd sack him. I don't know. There's a lot. I think I'm probably going to go with like the museum scenes, like just that entire sequence from like the door claving in, the whole clicker, that entire scene, because I think it was done so well. You never felt like, again, it's keeping that thing where the characters aren't superheroes. Like there's only 2 clickers, but you felt a lot of threat, and it did the things like a few subtle nods to the games, like Joel like very quietly reloading, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I thought that was probably the moment.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I would. Again, I was thinking back to the scientist at the beginning, just that moment when she kind of sets the scene for there's no vaccination, there's no medicine, bomb the city, start bombing now. Like, that was quite a strong bit. But the clickers, and it is basically the core of what the show's about, is like they were attacked zombie style by the clickers, like in a very like, this is the first time we've seen them. Again, real prosthetics. There was an extra running around in that suit doing all those twitches and diving over things and attacking and full on makeup. So
you know what, like, the actors union, for to get actual real clickers on set is really difficult. There's not many of them out there.
It's not manufactured out there, no. Especially at that stage. Like, wait till they need a bloater.
And then you have to find a clicker who can act as well.
There's a great photo of Neil Druckmann doing the rounds where he's kind of pointing, giving directions, like behind the scenes. And I always think extras are hilarious. I always think the Lord of the Rings Two Towers ones, where you've got Uruk-hai talking to Peter Jackson, sat having their lunch around a picnic table, is just some of the best photos you'll ever see. But yeah, clickers in the museum, moment of the week. I think we definitely echo that one, definitely. And final one, best game adaptation of the week. So what happened in this episode, Richie, that mirrored the video games the closest or the best for you? Chat, let us know what yours are.
I think this is museum again. I think because what made the museum scene work so well is how it was so much from the game while also working so well in the context of a TV show. I think that's what very slightly elevated above me from like the scientist at the beginning. So I think it is that Clickers in Museum again.
Clickers in the Museum. It's the spin-off from Night at the Museum.
It was very much the most gamey part of the episode.
Yeah, completely. You can see the video game elements, like the set dressing was exactly the same. The collapsing of rubble behind the door as soon as they go through it. Yeah, all it was missing was a quick time event, like big drawing triangle to hold it up. Yeah.
Well, we got that at the start when Joel moved the cabinet away from the door. He very much pressed triangle at that moment.
Getting them in there. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, Clickers in the Museum then for me. Yeah, chat, unless you've got anything else, Clickers at the Museum gets it again. And then, I guess we round out by looking ahead to next week. The teaser, the kind of show at the end of it. It's very much going to be a Bill and Frank episode. Probably I think next week's might actually be the 80 minutes again, so we get a long episode setting the scene for Bill's town and how he meets Frank by the looks of it. It looks like we're going to learn about their relationship, and then maybe Joel and Ellie come into it near the end of the episode. So it might not actually start or anything for the first hour or so with Joel and Ellie, which I think would be a nice pivot. And then at the end of the episode, we kind of see the two groups come together and find out what's going on. Jem, I think on Now TV they showed it kind of after the credits, but if you go on YouTube, there's HBO YouTube channel has like a 2-minute teaser for what's like next week on Game of Thrones, The Last of Us, and that's it, Richie. That is episode 2 reviewed and broken down right here on the ClickerCast. So thank you to everyone who's tuned in. Thank you to everyone who's watched long. Go out there, of course, enjoy the game. Enjoy the full playthrough up on the channel. Go check out Meg's channel. She's currently playing it ahead of time. I don't know, Meg, are you doing it every week? If so, you've got the kind of perfect accompaniment to this show. Go watch Meg play the game of the episode. Come in while we break down every chunk of the episode into a granular level. And then we'll review it, and we'll all get back here next week, and we'll do the exact same thing. Right here on youtube.com/Helix Plays Games. Of course, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, this also is available on podcast services. So if you want to listen to it on the move, hands-free, it's up there in the digital clouds as well. But without that, Richie, all we need to say is we'll see you next week. Don't forget to run along to the comments, stalk at us on social media, click at that notification bell, blow to yourself on all of our other fantastic content, and of course, above all else, endure and survive. We'll see you next week, folks. Take care. Have a good one. Goodbye.
Bye.